G'day guys, welcome back to the Boundary Riders YouTube channel, and today of course we are here to review round 9. We started right back on Thursday night with a very close finish in the end between Carlton and Melbourne. Had some big games throughout the weekend as well, but of course, like I just mentioned, let's start on Thursday night. Carlton v Melbourne was set up for a big game, but it was Carlton who led for all the night, but almost lost it at the final point. In the end, Carlton did win by 1 point, 77-76. Highest goal scorer in the end was Christian Petrarca with the 5 goals. He was massive. And there was one injury concern from this game. Adam Chera did do a hamstring and was subbed out in the third term. Only returned last week from a hamstring injury, and now he's out again. So that's really disappointing for him and for Carlton. But let's get to the game itself. Carlton were by far the better team in the first quarter with 5 straight goals and kept Melbourne scoreless. But the stats for the territory side of things at quarter time were quite interesting. Carlton only had 11 inside 50s to Melbourne's 13, but the scores at quarter time were obviously 30-0. So Melbourne had the territory, but just couldn't find an efficient way forward to get some score on the board. The Blues went out to a 36-point lead in the second term, but the D's finally got their first goal midway through the quarter through Christian Petrarca, who was really the only shining light for the majority of the first 3 quarters. And Carlton still won the quarter in the end and took a 31-point lead at half-time. And it just felt for the first 3 quarters that the Demons, every single time they would fight, scrounge a goal somehow, the Blues were just able to get a quick one back. But in the end, the Demons did kick the last 2 goals of the third term and went down by 22 points at 3-quarter time. Now, Hewitt was the sub, surprisingly, and kicked the early goal in the last quarter. And at this point, it just felt like that the bridge was too far for Melbourne. But they came back really hard. They did miss 2 early chances in the fourth term, which may have cost them in the end. But midway through the quarter, the Demons started to take their chances, which was really the first time they were doing it in the whole game. The Demons finished the game in super strong form with the last 5 goals of the game. It just fell short in the final moments, and Carlton were able to hold on for a 1-point win. I do want to quickly mention this in the review, that the dangerous tackle that was given away in the fourth quarter by Melbourne was an absolute joke. Look, not a Carlton hater by any means, but that's 2 games now they've been saved by the umpires. So let's get to the statistics of this game though. And on the AFL Fantasy front, of course, we have Sam Walsh who top scored with the 140, Christian Petrarca with the 134, Cripps with the 123, Neil Bullen with the 112, Gawn with the 109, along with Jack Viney. And now we get to the votes. And of course, like I mentioned every single week, we are doing a 3-2-1 voting system for every single game of the AFL season. And then at the end of the season, in the bye between the regular season and the finals, we will be doing a live countdown of the Boundary Riders votes. It'll be a great live stream. It's the biggest award in the AFL space, guys. Players are talking about it. It's a big deal. So let's get to the votes of this game. Now, this was really tough. You would think I would give Christian Petrarca the 3 votes here, even though he did lose. I am going to give the votes to Sam Walsh for the 3 votes. 2 votes went to Christian Petrarca and the 1 vote went to Paddy Cripps. Now, the reason why I've gone for Sam Walsh with the 3 votes is for the first 3 quarters of this game, he was massive. And even in the last quarter, he was quite good, but he was a step above every single player on the ground in the first 3 quarters. And he also kicked the first goal of the game, which really got the momentum started for Carlton. Christian Petrarca was by far Melbourne's best player, obviously. But I just felt like for the first quarter and a half, he was pretty well quiet, and Matt Kennedy actually shut him down pretty well. So for a quarter and a half of this game, Christian Petrarca was held out of it. So that's kind of why I went with the fact that he only got the 2 votes. And I felt like Sam Walsh was the best player for the whole night. Let's move to Friday night. First game was Geelong versus Port Adelaide, and no one really gave Port a chance here. Haven't won a game down at Kardinia Park since 2007. This was the first time Port Adelaide have defeated Geelong down in Geelong, and it was absolute scenes late in this game. Port Adelaide at one stage had a 49-point lead, but held on in the end for a 1-goal win. 101 Port Adelaide to 95 to Geelong. Highest goal scorers in the end were Willie Rioli and Tyson Stengel, both with the 4 goals. They were big for both of their teams. Now let's get to the game itself. What an insane start to this game for Port. No one really saw this coming. Not even the biggest one-eyed Port Adelaide fan would have seen this sort of start. Port kicked the first 4 goals of the game, and I expected, like most of us, that the Cats would fight their way right back into the game. They did kick the next 2, but Port Adelaide kicked 4 of the next 5 goals in the first term to kick 8 goals to quarter time and take a 29-point lead at the quarter time break. Now, when we expected the Cats to fight back in the second term, Port Adelaide just continued their hot form. They kicked the first 3 goals of the second term, and at one stage had a 49-point lead through the second quarter. Now, an insane substitute was made by Geelong midway through the quarter in the second term, which was Mullen coming in for Stanley, which was actually a tactical sub, which I did like from Chris Scott. I thought they really needed to add some pace to this game, and Reece Stanley, he's been in pretty poor form. So they chucked blitzers in the ruck. They did a bunch of shuffling with their players. Mullen came onto the ground and actually tagged Jason Horne-Francis in the second half, which was massive. But the Cats did finally respond with 2 goals of their own. Hawkins finally broke his 1-month drought, kicked a goal, but Port Adelaide still held a 41-point lead at half-time. But then the Cats started to claw their way back. In the third term, they kicked 6 goals in the term and were only down by 18 points at three-quarter time. Now, Port Adelaide did kick the first goal of the final term to push the lead back to 24 points, and it felt like Port had done enough. It felt like, Geelong fired their shot in the third term, and Port Adelaide were going to be able to run away with this win. But then Geelong came really, really hard. They kicked 3 goals to be back within 1 kick with a few minutes to go in this game. But the Cats just fell short. And Port Adelaide, I have to give them credit in the last couple of minutes. They really professionally held on in the final few minutes of this game with their stoppage play. They didn't want to go long. They didn't want to blaze away and maybe turn it over. So I have to give kudos there for Port Adelaide. They won by 1 goal in the end. They were very lucky, but no one expected them to win this game. So you can sit there and say they almost choked, which, they did. But you have to give Port Adelaide credit here. They were no chance in this game. Huge credit to Port Adelaide. Great win for them. And by far their best win of the season so far. Let's move to the statistics on the AFL Fantasy front. Of course, Ollie Wines, top score with the 133. Best performance I've seen from him in nearly 18 months. Zach Butters with the 124. Jason Horne-Francis with the 113. Zach Guthrie with the 104. Holmes with the 101. And Houston with the 97. And then we get to the votes. Now, my brother did give the votes for this game. He watched this one. He has gone 3 votes, Willie Rioli, 2 votes to Ollie Wines, and 1 vote to Zach Butters. Next up, we get to Fremantle versus Sydney. And in an emotional game for Fremantle, obviously an emotional 24 hours for them with the passing of Cam McCarthy, they just felt like there was a little bit off the pace. They were just a little bit off during the night. And the Swans put them to the sword, really. They won by 48 points in the end, 87-39. Highest goal scorer in the end was Will Hayward with the 4 goals. He was massive, trying to get a couple of extra dollars on his contract. So the injury concern, there was one late injury concern to Nick Blakey, who had a head clash with a teammate in the 4th term and was taken off the ground. I'm unsure at this stage if it was Calder's concussion, but we'll have to wait and see. That would be a massive loss for Sydney next week against Carlton if Nick Blakey's out. So hopefully, for myself as a Swans fan, for the rest of us, that he is okay to go. But let's get to the game. It was a tight start to this one. It was a really contested game of footy, really high pressure from both teams, and it nearly took halfway through the first quarter to actually see a goal, which was kicked by Sydney. The Dockers had some chances in the first quarter, but the Swans' pressure was way too strong for the majority of the game, but the first quarter they started really hot around the footy of Sydney, and they took a 7-point lead into quarter time. The Swans' pressure just felt like it increased even more in the second term, and the Swans just dominated massive parts of the quarter. The Swans kicked 6 straight goals in the second term to Fremantle, who only kicked 3 behind. The Swans led by 40 points at halftime. The Dockers had some big chances to get somewhat back into the game in the third quarter, but just continued to waste so many opportunities, as you can see the scoreline. And I will just say, the shots from Tracy and Voss in this game, that the goal umpire did not pay a goal from the right forward pocket. I'm sure most of you have seen the highlights. They look like goals to me. Now, I'm not going to say the umpire got it wrong or whatever, but because he was obviously in the best decision, but on the broadcast, it looked like goals to both of them. So a little bit hard done by there. But Fremantle really had only themselves to blame this quarter as well. They kicked 1 goal 5 in the third term, Sydney's 2 goal 2, and Sydney took a 43-point lead in the three-quarter time. And at that point, the three-quarter time, the game kind of felt done. Sharp did kick 2 straight goals in the final term, but the Swans just did what they had to do and won in the end by 48 points. Now, I think Sydney were extremely good in this game. Another great performance from them. Probably their second best performance of the year, just behind the game against the Giants last week. On Fremantle's side, it was a super emotional 24 hours for them, especially to their senior players. You saw it before the game when they did the tribute for Cam McCarthy, the likes of Alex Pearce and Nat Pfeiffer in tears. So I really can't take a lot of this game into Fremantle's form. It's so hard for them to back up one of their best mates passing away. So, you can't really look into this game too much for Fremantle. They were in such an emotional state. So let's move to the statistics now on the AFL Fantasy front. Ollie Florent, top scorer with the 135. Jeremy Sharp with the 118. Jake Lloyd with the 112. Sarong with the 107. Heaney with the 106. And Liam Ryan with the 105. Now let's get to the votes. 3 votes went to Chad Warner. 2 votes to Will Hayward. And the 1 vote, again on the votes sheet, is James Jordan. Now, again, you'd be looking at the stat sheet. You're thinking, why has James Jordan got a vote here? He has again gone into his tagging role that he's done the last few weeks. He obviously took down Lockie Whitfield last week. And this week, he had a massive role on Jordan Clark. And he kept his run and carry game of Jordan Clark non-existent. Jordan did a massive job. But he also did stuff on the other end. He was very damaging with the football. He had 18 disposals, 7 marks, and 8 score involvements, which was the highest for a Sydney player on the ground. So not only was he doing his tagging role against Jordan Clark and locking him down, but he was setting up goals for Sydney. So massive performance from James Jordan. I felt like for the first 6 or 7 weeks, he was just trying to find his spot in the Sydney lineup. But now I think he's found that spot. And it's similar role to what Ryan Clark had in 2022. But I feel like he's a lot more damaging James Jordan. So I feel like Ryan Clark was essentially just in the game to lock down a player. But I feel like with James Jordan, he is actually, contributing on the other side of things as well. So I really like the role that James Jordan is playing at the moment. And I think he deserved the 1 vote in the end. So let's get to the first game on Saturday, guys. And a big game down in Tasmania for both Hawthorn and St Kilda. And Hawthorn now win 2 games in a row and win by 5 points in a nail-biter at the end. Hawthorn won 58-53. So let's get straight to the talking points of this game. Hawthorn really brought the heat in the first quarter. And I love to see the gameplay or the game plan that the Hawks went into with their forward line structure. Hawthorn knew that if they bombed the ball in all day and didn't give a contest in the air, that St Kilda would just have a field day. But their plan was that every single player, whether that be Nick Watson or Jack Gunston, whoever it is, has to give a contest in the air. And it really, really helped them with their small forwards, crumbing the ball and getting the ball to dangerous areas. And the plan really worked in the first quarter with the Hawks leading by 15 points midway through the quarter. The Saints did kick 2 goals late in the first quarter to only be down by 4 points at quarter time. It was a bit of a standstill sort of quarter after midway through the second term. There was 3 quick goals early in the quarter, 2 to Hawthorn and 1 to St Kilda. But then it came a bit of a grind, and at halftime, the Hawks led by 10 points, so it was still quite a tight contest. In the third term, it did start to open up a little bit. Hawthorn did get out to a 12-point lead, but St Kilda did really well. The Saints almost got in front for the first time, but a late couple of goals there from Hawthorn got themselves out to a pretty comfortable lead at three-quarter time by 15 points. Now, St Kilda kicked the only 2 goals of the final term, so you would think they'd have a few chances, maybe even steal the game, but Hawthorn, they did have some chances to win this game and actually blow the margin out far enough that, they could have had a comfortable victory, but they kicked 4 behinds in the last quarter. They did enough in the end, Hawthorn, in the final minutes to hold on, did really well in the end to grind out the last few moments of the game. Hawthorn did well to hold on to a 5-point win. So now let's move to the statistics. And on the AFL Fantasy front, of course, Rowan Marshall top score with a massive 164. Jack Steele with the 131. Bonner with the 129. Meek with the 124. Wanganeen Miller with the 119. And then Wilkie with the 114. And now we'll get to the votes in this game. 3 votes went to Rowan Marshall, 2 votes to Carl Amon, and the 1 vote to Lloyd Meek. I really love the ruck battle in this game. My brother saw a bit of it as well. He said they both played really well. But we gave the votes to Rowan Marshall because he was a little bit better around the ground. Next up, let's move to the Bombers versus the Giants. And the Giants led for the majority of the first 3 quarters of this game, but Essendon came home like a steam train. They played absolutely brilliantly in the end. They held their pressure game for the whole 4 quarters, and in the end, they ran up by 20 points. 82 to the Bombers, 62 to the Giants. Highest scorer in the end was Kyle Langford with the 4 goals. He was big. Let's get to the game. The Giants started off really well in the first quarter and made it really hard for the Bombers to score. But the signs were showing early that the Bombers were going to bring the pressure in this game in a great start. But the Giants still led by 19 points at quarter time. Then the Bombers started to fight their way back into the contest in the second term, with both teams bringing the pressure. But a late goal to the Bombers saw them only down by 12 points at half time. The Giants' pressure started to drop in the second half, and the Bombers really made them pay. Halfway through the third quarter, the Bombers drew level, and then led by Kyle Langford up forward, the Dons actually took the lead for the first time late in the third term and led by 8 points at three-quarter time. Now, a goal each way to start the final term set up for a big finish, but the Bombers went on quickly to kick 2 more goals and push the lead over a 3-goal margin. And then for the second half of the final quarter, Essendon made it really difficult for the Giants to find space. They made it an absolute grind. And in the end, the Bombers were able to grind out in the last 10 minutes of the game and win the game in the end by 20 points. Really good performance from Essendon. They're now 6 wins, 2 losses and 1 draw, currently sitting in 3rd spot. I don't think many people would have seen that at the start of the season. So congratulations to the Bombers. They're doing really well. They've got to continue though. We've seen this sort of stuff before, but they've started off really nicely. And they couldn't have done much better. They've only really had 1 bad game this year against Port Adelaide. Let's move to the statistics. AFL Fantasy front, of course. Nick Martin top score with the 121. Mason Redmond with the 120. Durham with the 101. McGrath with the 99. Tom Green, highest scorer for the Giants, with 98. And Kyle Langford with the 93. Now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes went to Kyle Langford, 2 votes to Sam Durham, and 1 vote to Mac Welfie. Now, 3 votes to Kyle Langford. He was by far the most dangerous forward for the Bombers throughout the whole game. He was one of the few players in the first half that was like a step above most of his teammates. He was brilliant. And then the second half really came to the fore. He started to kick some goals. They had to even change the matchup that he had, which was Jack Buckley, and Sam Taylor went on to him. And he did a lot better, Sam Taylor, but Kyle Langford was the best Bombers player by far today. Mac Welfie, now again, you may look at the statistics. I know we've talked about it before, but he didn't have a big game on the statistics front. I mean, he did kick 3 goals, but he did a lot more than that. His role against Lachie Whitfield was massive for the Bombers. We saw Sydney do it last week with James Jordan. Mac Welfie, he's done it a few times this year. I know he did it against James Sicily in round 1, and he really did well to lock down the influence of Lachie Whitfield. Mac Welfie really stood up, so that's why he got the 1 vote in this game in the end. Now let's move to Saturday night. Both games were pretty dismal, let's be honest, okay? We'll start with the Richmond Western Bulldogs game, and Richmond were decimated by injuries in the end. Before the game and now obviously after it. We'll talk about the injuries in a second, but the Bulldogs, look, they did what they had to do. They flogged a team who's in all sorts at the moment. They won by 91 points in the end, the Bulldogs, 133 to the Tigers, 42. Now let's get to the injuries. Absolute carnage for the Tigers in this game. In the second term, Jack Graham did his hamstring. He was subbed out. He just came back into the team and now he's been subbed out with a hamstring injury, so really disappointing for him. Sam Bakes had a big collision in the third term and he was out with concussion in the third quarter. And finally, we had Maurice Rioli, who hurt his leg late in the game when it was caught under Treloar during a tackle. So he was out as well. 3 big injuries. They now got injuries in double digits now for Richmond. It is absolutely terrible. It's really tough for Adam Uze to really look at, his performance as a coach this year because they've just had so many injuries. It's really, really tough for the Tigers. It's so surprising because the only win they've had this year is against Sydney. When the Tigers are playing well, like they did against Sydney, they are a good team. They shouldn't be in 17th spot, in my opinion. When you got so many injuries, you have to use these youth players. They just aren't up to the standard just yet. It's just going to be tough for them. Now, there was one injury concern for the Bulldogs. There was an injury to Lathan Vandermeer, who hurt his shin. He was subbed out in the second term. That's really the only concern the Bulldogs had in this game. So let's get to it. Dogs kicked 3 early goals and it felt ominous early. The Dogs did miss some chances in the first term. They kicked 3 goals, 6. But they kept the Tigers goalless and led by 23 points at quarter time. The Tigers kicked their first goal midway through the second term. Both teams had 3 goals each in the second quarter, so it felt like the Tigers were doing okay. They were keeping up. But 3 late goals to the Dogs took the lead out to a 47-point margin. The Dogs did waste some chances in the second term as well. They kicked a lot of behinds, but they did a lot better in the third quarter. They put Richmond to the sword. They kicked 4 goals 2 to 1 goal 1 in the third term. And then we got to the last quarter. The Dogs absolutely thrashed the Tigers early in the final quarter. They kicked 6 quick goals, pushed the lead over 100 points. The Tigers did okay to get 2 late goals and bring the margin back to under 100 points, but in the end, a 91-point loss is still a massive loss in the end. My dog in the background's very happy that the Dogs won. Anyway, let's get to the statistics on the AFL Fantasy front. Adam Treloar, top scorer with the 154, 41 disposals. He had a big game. Ed Richards with the 141. James Harms, first time he kicked a goal for the Bulldogs and he kicked 4 in the end. So he had a massive game. 134. Marcus Bontempelli with the 126. Aaron Norton with the 111. And then Tim English with the 109. So a lot of top goal scorers in this game. James Harms got 4. Norton got 4. And Darcy got 4. But let's get to the votes in the end. The 3 votes went to James Harms. 2 votes went to Aaron Norton and 1 vote went to Marcus Bontempelli. Now let's get to the last game on Saturday night, which was the Gold Coast Suns up against North Melbourne, up in the top end NT. And the Gold Coast have made it a bit of a fortress up there. It was a bit of a battle in the first quarter, but the Gold Coast did really well in the end. Smashed them in the final quarter and won in the end by 68 points. 120 to the Gold Coast Suns, 52 to North Melbourne. Let's get to the game. North Melbourne did start quite well in this game, and the Gold Coast looked extremely sluggish at times in this first quarter. Unfortunately for North Melbourne, though, they missed some chances in the first quarter, and the Gold Coast did take their chances to take a 1-goal lead at quarter time. The Gold Coast really responded in the second term and did miss a few chances in front of goal, kicking 3 goal 8, but at this point it kind of felt like North Melbourne were just holding on. They were on the ropes, and they were down by 25 points at half time. The Gold Coast took full control in the second half. They kicked 12 goals to 5, and at times it really felt like North Melbourne couldn't survive with the humid conditions up in Darwin. And the Gold Coast led by 43 points at 3-quarter time, and in the end they ran away winners by 68 points. Now I do want to mention Bailey Humphrey's game. Now, he actually started as the sub. You look at the stat sheet, and if you didn't look at like his game or didn't go into more depth about it, you'd see 12 touches, 5 tackles, couple of points. You're like, oh, it's a pretty average game from Bailey Humphrey. He came on at 3-quarter time, and what a massive last quarter he had. He had 12 disposals, 5 tackles, 2 points as well. He could have kicked 2 goals. He had 7 scorer involvements, 7 inside 50s and 6 clearances. Now, I think he started as the sub because they've got a quick turnaround next week to play the Cats. It's only a 5-day turnaround, but I think he'll definitely be in the 22, the main 22 on Thursday night next week against the Cats. Massive performance as the sub, and I mean, I don't think you've seen many quarters of footy that good. So, great work from Bailey Humphrey. I think he's ready to explode onto the scene very soon. Let's get to the statistics in this game, though. Top scorer in the AFL Fantasy front was Touk Miller with the 108. Mac Andrew with the 107. Davies Uniacke with the 105. Zach Fisher with the 103. Clousey with the 100. And Jared Witt with the 99. Now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes went to Touk Miller. 2 votes went to Sam Collins, and 1 vote went to Clousey. I really loved the game that Clousey played. I think there was maybe a threat that he may have got dropped this week, but he played brilliantly. 2 goals in the first half. Played really good off that wing. Sometimes did a little bit of unrewarding role playing off that wing at times, but he was brilliant. He deserved the vote. Sam Collins down back did really well on Nick Larkey, locked him down, and Touk Miller as always led from the front, so that's why the votes went that way. So guys, let's get to the first game on Sunday. Collingwood up against the West Coast Eagles. Now the result pretty much went the way that we were expecting. There was a lot of injuries that we'll talk about in a second, but Collingwood did go on to win in the end by 66 points. Collingwood 103, West Coast Eagles 37. So, first injury let's cover is Jeremy Howe. He actually injured his groin in this game and was subbed off at quarter time. And at the same time, who was out of this game was Harvey Harrison. He was out with an ankle injury. And so Collingwood were already 2 down on the bench by the second term. Now, the player who did come on as the sub was Bytel, obviously a previous St Kilda player who was delisted, picked up by Collingwood as a supplement player, and played his first game, but did exit the game early with concussions. That's really disappointing for him. Now, on the West Coast side of things, though, Jack Petruccelli injured his ankle in the first term and he was subbed out. And then Jeremy McGovern, probably the biggest one of the day, did receive a heavy knock to the sternum in the third quarter and had to go to hospital with internal injuries. Now, they have said that he is okay, but it's unknown as to the injury at this stage, recording this midway through Sunday, so about 4:30. It could be a rib fracture. It's really unfortunate for West Coast and Jeremy McGovern, of course. He's a massive loss for them. Now, let's get to the game itself. The Eagles actually started this game quite nicely. Ryan Marriott kicked the first goal of the game, but the Pies did look a step above in the opening term with 4 quick goals in response. And after a bit of a grind throughout the last part of the first quarter, they did lead by 21 points at quarter time. The Eagles looked okay in the second term. They 2 of the first 3 goals of the quarter, but then the Pies really started to hit their groove. Collingwood piled on 6 quick goals to blow the lead out to 55 points at halftime. And by that point, it did feel like both teams just kind of were going through the motions, put the cue in the rack, so to speak. West Coast didn't kick a goal in the third term. The Pies only kicked 3 and took the lead out to a 72-point margin. And the Eagles did win the last quarter, but the job was done for Collingwood. In the end, they ran away by 66 points. So let's look at the statistics in this game. Nick Dacos top scored with the 131. Jack Crisp with the 130. Josh Dacos with the 120. Witherden with the 108. Pendlebury with the 104. And then Liam Duggan with the 102. Let's get to the votes for this game. So in the end, I have given 3 votes to Nick Dacos, 2 votes to Jack Crisp, and 1 vote to Scott Pendlebury. Guys, let's get to the final game of round 9, and what a crazy game it was. It was at the Adelaide Oval, the Crows against the Lions, and in the end, it ended up a draw, 90 to each team. Massive game in the end. I didn't really expect a draw. I was expecting the Crows to win this one pretty comfortably, but to the credit of the Brisbane Lions, they played really well. Now, the highest goal scorers in the end was surprisingly Cal Archie, who kicked 4 goals. Massive performance from him. And Darcy Fogarty also got 4 goals, so really good performance from him in the end. And there was one injury concern from this game. It was Worrell, who injured his wrist early stages of the third term and took no further part in the game after that. So really disappointing for him because he's had a really good season so far for the Crows down back. Now let's get to the game itself. It was a real big struggle in the first term. Both teams fighting hard to take an early lead. Neither side could really break away. The Lions did have a 9-point lead in the late stages of the term, but the Crows got a late goal to get back to within 3 points at quarter time. The Crows got in front early in the second term. The Lions quickly responded and actually got in front by 11 points midway through the quarter. But in the end, the Crows fought their way back and took the lead just at half-time by 2 points. Now, the Lions did get a quick goal in the third term to retake the lead, but then the Crows started to break away. They kicked 3 goals unanswered. And at this point, it kind of felt like maybe the Crows were too good for the Lions here. But then the Lions got on a bit of a run. They got 2 late goals in the third term to only be 1 point down. And then the Lions kicked 3 straight goals pretty quickly in the last quarter to take an 18-point lead. And at that point, it felt like the Lions had it all done. But then again, the Crows responded. It just felt like every single time a team would try to break away, the other team would respond. It was a really good game of footy. The Crows then kicked 4 straight goals and then took the lead. So then they were up by 6 points. It felt like at that point, maybe the Crows had done enough. Lions kicked a late goal, brought the scores level, and then there was a couple of late chances to either side. But in the end, neither team could break away, and the final scores were 90-90, like I just mentioned before. So a really good performance from both teams. Unfortunately for them, though, a draw doesn't really help them with their ladder woes and trying to push back towards the top 8, unfortunately. Let's look at the statistics in this game. So on the AFL Fantasy Front, of course, Jordan Dawson top score with the 122, Matt Crouch with the 117, Josh Dunkley with the 114, Riley O'Brien with the 112, Dane Zorko with the 109, continuing his good form, and Rory Laird as well, also got the 109. But now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes went to Isaac Rankin, 2 votes to Jordan Dawson, and 1 vote to Cal Archie. But let's move on to the AFL ladder, of course. Being at the end of round 9, it is the Swans who are on top. Game clear now on 32 points. The Cats, after 2 straight losses, sitting in second with 28 points. The Bombers, surprisingly, in the 3rd spot with a big win as well, and in a pretty good form at the moment. 4 wins out of their past 5, and one of them being a draw. Melbourne are in 4th spot with 24 points, along with the Giants in 5th, Port Adelaide in 6th, Carlton in 7th. Collingwood, with their big win today over the West Coast Eagles, got themselves into 8th spot on 22 points. Fremantle fall out of the 8. They're in 9th spot with 20 points, along with the Gold Coast Suns in 10th. The Bulldogs, with their big win against the Tigers, have got a really big percentage boost, and they sit with 16 points in 11th spot. The Crows sit in 12th, and the Lions sit in 13th, both on 14 points. So again, the draw didn't really help them out too much. St Kilda, right down the bottom in 14th. Really disappointing season so far from St Kilda. They're sitting on 12 points, along with the Hawks, who have won their last 2 games and 3 out of their past 4. So they're starting to build into their season, Hawthorn. West Coast Eagles, disappointing performance in the end. They are in 16th. Richmond are in 17th on 4 points. And then finally, on the bottom, still without a win, is North Melbourne. But guys, that is the end of the review for round 9. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you did watch this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Really appreciate the support on YouTube lately, guys. We are nearly at 1,000 subscribers. We've been growing like crazy. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure to subscribe. And of course, if you are listening over on Spotify, make sure to leave us a follow. And also make sure to leave us 5 stars. But we'll catch you all next week, guys, for the review of round 10.